Boldly going where no science show has gone before. The Naked Scientists.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of The Naked Scientists in 2009, and that's with Dr. Cat. Hello, Cat.
Hello.
Dr. Dave. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Chris.
And also with me, Chris Smith. Now, in this week's show, how scientists have found a way to give blind mice their sight back, how mosquitoes fall in love. Well, us humans flutter our eyelids at each other, but these creatures flap their wings. And also we've got new insights into how cancers reprogram other tissues to help them to spread around the body, and that's all coming up shortly. Kat.
Thanks, Chris. Also this week we're kicking off the new year with a bumper crop of your science questions, including finding out, and I love this one, whether an iPod becomes heavier when you load it with music, why are bikes easier to keep upright when they're moving, I have fallen off several stationary bicycles in my lifetime, and how do clouds generate lightning? The answers to all those are on the way.
Thanks, Kat. And in this week's Kitchen Science, I'll be showing you a funky trick with a drop of water. All you need is a piece of plastic, a drop of water, and something interesting to look at, like a sheet of printed paper.
Thank you very much, Dave. That's Dave with Kitchen Science. Well worth having a go, an amazing observation to be made. So if you've got a question for us, though, you can email the programme on chris@thenakedscientist.com.
The Naked Scientist Podcast, powered by UK Fast, the UK's best hosting provider. On the web at ukfast.net.
This week, scientists have published a paper in the journal Science where they have found out how mosquitoes tell each other that they fancy one another. Now have a listen to this. That is a male mosquito buzzing its wings at something like 600 hertz, 600 times a second. Have a listen to the female mosquito, and these are Aedes aegypti mosquitoes. Here we go. Now, I won't subject you to too much more because Dr. Cat has got her fingers in her ears. But that's at about 400 hertz, so 400 times a second. The female's slightly slower than the males. But if you do what two researchers at Cornell did, that's Lauren Cater and Ben Arthur, they put one of those mosquitoes tethered to a pin with a piece of superglue so they could keep it in one place, and they bring in a mosquito of the opposite sex and they record what happens to the wings of the two. Have a listen to this. Now, what's actually happening is that the two mosquitoes are adapting the beating frequency of their wings so that they harmonise. Now, they're not making their wings flap at exactly the same rate as each other. The female stays at her roughly 400 times a second rate, and the male stays at his roughly 600 times. But by getting them just right, because when you have multiples of a frequency, you get things called harmonics. And the first set of harmonics that are the same for these two are at 1200 hertz. In other words, when you take the third harmonic of the female and the second harmonic of the male, you get something at 1200 hertz. That's those beats you can hear going through that rhythm. And the mosquito's antennae are very sensitive, it turns out, to vibration at 1200 hertz. They have something called a Johnston's organ, and what this team of researchers did was to put wires into these mosquitoes' antennae and record what actually happened when they heard those sounds, and the activity shoots up. And so the mosquitoes tune into each other, synchronise their wing beats to send a message to each other that one is interested in the other, and then they know that they can mate, they get together and mate, and then when they have mated, something happens to the female because she loses interest in those sounds after that, and the researchers were able to show that once a mosquito was mated, she would no longer respond at those sounds. And this is very important, the researchers point out, because now we understand, in the words of Lauren Cater, partly what constitutes a sexy male mosquito, because what they're trying to do is to understand the mating habits of mosquitoes, because at the moment mosquitoes are probably the most dangerous animal on Earth because they spread one of the most fearsome diseases of all time. That's malaria, which affects 300 million people a year and also causes 3 million deaths. They also, if they're Aedes aegypti, like these mosquitoes, they spread another disease called dengue, which is causing 50 or 60 million cases a year. So very important diseases. If we can understand how mosquitoes attract and mate with each other, we can try and make ways of blocking that process and therefore stopping them from transmitting these kind of infections. So very important work.
And one of the things I think is most fascinating about that paper is that previously researchers had just thought these mosquitoes were actually deaf, that males couldn't hear high frequencies and female mosquitoes were totally tone deaf. And now they've discovered not only can they hear, but, you know, they can tune into each other.
And they can also hear up to 2000 hertz, so their antennae are very, very sensitive. And in fact, as Lauren Cater put it to me, there are as many nerves that the mosquitoes are using to effectively hear with their antennae as we've got in our ears.
Fabulous stuff. Who knew mosquitoes were so complex? From one complex animal to a very complex disease, and that's cancer. 9 out of 10 cancer deaths are due to tumours that have spread from the original site, the primary tumour, to form secondary tumours in places like the lungs, the liver, the brain. And scientists call this process metastasis. And now new research from scientists in the US, the UK and Canada has revealed a very important molecule called LOX that's involved in metastasis, and this could lead to new treatments for cancer. Now, to explain why LOX is so important, we need to backtrack a bit, because secondary tumours, these metastases, they don't just spring up anywhere. And in the same way that if a gardener wants to spread seeds on the ground, you need to have the right soil. So seeds that fall on a gravel path, they're not really going to grow, but seeds that fall in nice moist soil, they'll grow. And it's the same with cancer cells that spread around the body. They need to find these nice little niches called pre-metastatic niches that are formed by little bundles of cells from the bone marrow that sit in these little bundles, and they sort of make an environment that the cancer cells like. And now Janine Erler and her colleagues have found that a protein called LOX helps to play an important role in forming these niches. Now, LOX acts a bit like a master craftsman, and it glues together the proteins that form the extracellular matrix, or the jelly that holds cells together. And they think that LOX is gluing together these proteins, attracting bone marrow cells, and therefore making the right kind of environment for cancer cells to spread into. And so the team showed that LOX was important by transplanting mice with normal breast cancer cells, and then breast cancer cells that had been genetically manipulated so they didn't carry this LOX protein at all. And they found that these LOX-free cancer cells just didn't really spread. They couldn't make the changes in the area to spread into. So this is really important, because it's not just mouse breast cancer cells. They found in 95 samples of secondary tumours from cancer patients with all types of cancer, from breast, bowel, stomach and esophageal cancers. In more than half of these samples, there were high levels of LOX and little clusters of these bone marrow cells, so potentially could be a good target for cancer drugs in the future.
It's amazing to think that a cancer cell in one part of the body is manipulating or orchestrating the behaviour of whole clusters of tissues elsewhere in the body and making it possible for it to spread in that way.
They're incredible things. They're almost like rogue organs, tumours are. They manipulate the immune system, they manipulate all these molecules to kind of get their own way and get round the body's processes.
And one of the things we have to remember is, of course, cancers have got the entire genetic repertoire of our body at their disposal. And not just that, but they can also rearrange genes because they're genetically a bit messed up anyway. And this means that they can make whole new proteins that do whole new jobs. And that's why they're such a danger to life, because they completely contort your biochemistry to whatever they want to do.
Exactly, they're evolving cells. They have all these changes in them, and then under whatever pressure the body throws at them, they change again. It's crazy things.
Do we know why your body has these clusters of bone marrow cells around the place normally?
Well, it's probably to do with the tumour cells that are around. They secrete these things like LOX, and that causes changes. But then there may be just these bone marrow cells in little groups. It's not really very well understood what prepares these pre-metastatic niches. Some of it might be from cancer cells, some of it might be there already, we don't really know.
Some people have suggested it's a repair process, because if you do experiments on mice which have been manipulated so they make green glowing bone marrow cells, and then you make, say, injuries in the skin, then you see skin cells that are glowing green later. And what this suggests is that because the only cells in the body that glow green are bone marrow stem cells, probably stem cells come out of the bone marrow, they get recruited to the injured place, and they then turn into new cells at the injury site to help to make good a repair.
That's an intriguing link between cancer and long-term inflammation as well, that kind of thing.
OK, now onto a completely different subject. The Spirit and Opportunity Mars rovers, which have recently celebrated their 5th anniversary on Mars, seem to have discovered a strange force which is pushing rocks around on the Martian surface. If you look at photos of the Martian surface, it's strewn with small rocks from the size of pebbles to cobbles. However, if you look at them, if they'd been thrown down on the ground, you'd expect some of them to be touching, some of them to be a long way from others, but sort of randomly organised. But if you actually look at them on Mars, they're all about as far away from other rocks as they can get. It's as if they're repelling each other. Now, there is wind on Mars. The only thing which could be really be moving them is the wind on Mars. But the wind, although it can get up really quite fast, tens of miles an hour, even hundreds of miles an hour, because there's only about 1% of the atmosphere on Mars than on Earth, there's not enough force there to actually move these quite large rocks.
So what do they think's going on?
Well, John Pelletier from the University of Arizona seems to have worked out, he's got a really good theory. It's very similar to what happens if you've ever made a dam in a stream on a sandy beach using rocks. If you put a rock down in the stream, you'll find that the sand gets eroded around at the front of it and at the sides where the water speeds up to go round it. and that slowly makes a hole, and then eventually the rock sort of falls upstream into that hole, and so the rock moves. Now, if you imagine two rocks on Mars, they're sitting next to each other and you've got wind blowing around them. There'll be sort of a sheltered area between them, so you'll tend to get sand depositing in that area between them. And when the wind splits to go around them, it'll speed up, so you get erosion on either side of them.
So they'll fall apart, they'll move away from each other.
So you get two holes dug and they fall apart and they slowly move away from each other, and it's as if they're repelling each other. So
it's intriguing to think there's a sort of mathematical explanation for something like that, isn't it?
I wish there were like doozers on Mars. That'd be brilliant.
It would be a lot more fun, but...
Thank you, Dave. That's an intriguing story. Thank you for that. Now, an intriguing story as well this week, back here on Earth, is the scientists have uncovered how it is that the brain prioritises some of the things that are coming into the body and the sensory information that we're assailed with and deluged with every second of our lives. Now, this is Andy Parton, who's a researcher at Brunel University. He's got a paper in this week's journal PNAS, and he's uncovered this intriguing rhythmic firing pattern that the brain uses to hide information in the information that we're processing. So in other words, if you're looking at a picture and you want to look at one bit of that picture, although there's information from the entire picture coming into your brain, your attention is focused on the bit you're looking at. Now, part of that is because obviously the eye has the macula, which has got far more information coming in terms of detail to that bit you're looking at, but still you're able to ignore all the other things going on around you and just focus on that thing that you want your attention to be focused on. How do you do that? Well, it turns out that the brain adds this coding, which is a rhythmic firing of nerve cells at 50 hertz, so about 50 times a second. And when you have that code hidden in the nerve signal, then the brain pays much more attention to the things that have got that code added to them. And what they did was to sit down a group of volunteers in front of a computer screen on which they had 3 circles with vertical lines on them. And one of the circles was flickering on and off 30 times a second, another at 50 times a second, and the other was effectively not changing. And what they asked the subjects to do was to look at these 3 circles side by side and to spot which one, whenever the vertical lines got very slightly wider. And what they found was that people were much, much better at noticing when the lines got slightly wider in the circle flashing at 50 hertz than any of the others. And when they asked the people, can you see any of the circles flashing, they couldn't. So this was a totally subconscious effect. So it shows that the brain has this ability to apply this code to processing information which prioritises that information, but you don't just have to let the brain decide what's important. You can actually hide that information in the sensory information that's coming in. And so what this means is advertising. Are we going to see much more arresting adverts in future where we're going to be assailed with TV adverts you can't take your eyes off because you can't literally tear yourself away because they're so infectiously interesting? Or what about things like safety? Cars, for example, you could have warning signals, you could have road signs that are much better at catching your attention when they have to, but only when they have to make driving more safe. But also from a clinical perspective, and I asked Andy Parton this, there are various clinical syndromes where people have a problem paying attention to what's important and screening out what isn't. I'm thinking of things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. These people have a problem focusing on the important things and not being distracted. And at the same time, people who have strokes can get a neglect syndrome where they might, for instance, ignore half their body. They don't realise it exists. They can't relate to half of their body. And he thinks that perhaps a better understanding of this system might help us to develop better ways to treat both of those problems.
The other interesting thing is that televisions update about 50 times a second, so I wonder whether that's part of the reason why they're quite so interesting.
That's why you think TV is so compelling, not just because it's Strictly Come Dancing, Dave. You just think it's something to do with the electronics.
Might be in it, I don't know. Anyway, this is a lovely story about not 3 blind mice, but certainly blind mice. And we're often talking here on The Naked Scientists about research into stem cells, which could have the potential to treat many different diseases. And this is because you can persuade stem cells to take on the identity of a wide range of different cell types. And now researchers at the University of Washington in Seattle have used human embryonic stem cells to restore some sight, or at least responses to light, to blind mice. And the researchers were using mice that were lacking a gene called CRX, which means that basically they're blind from birth as they don't develop proper photoreceptors. These are the cells that sense light. And they grew human embryonic stem cells in the lab. They treated them with certain chemicals and growth factors that encourage the stem cells to change towards being retinal cells. These are the cells that are found down the back of your eyeball that sense the light, send the message to the brain. And then the scientists injected these modified stem cells into the eyeballs of mice. And they found that the retinal cells from the stem stem cells settled into the back of the eyeball, forming organised layers. And then when they injected these cells into the eyes of CRX deficient mice, these blind mice, they started to turn into photoreceptors. And when the scientists tested the mice's responses to light, they found that these new photoreceptors could respond to light flashes compared to eyeballs that hadn't been injected at all. So from these mice, they would show no response to light because obviously they don't have these photoreceptors. And also the eyes that had the biggest areas of transplanted cells had the biggest responses to light, showing that it's a definite effect of the transplant. And so this is really, really interesting because it suggests that, at least in humans possibly, human embryonic stem cells could be used to replace damaged photoreceptors, and this could restore sight to people whose eyesight is damaged, for example, through macular degeneration, or even to those who've been born blind. I think it's a really exciting step forward.
It certainly is, because it tells you that the signals are there in the tissue to tell those embryonic stem cells what to turn into and also how to wire themselves up correctly in order to work. Now, obviously, it's early days, and these mice are not humans, so there's some way to go yet.
Absolutely,
I mean, we have to be cautious here, but at the same time, small steps and everything, that's very encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't seeing, these mice couldn't see anything as such, but certainly getting a new response to light in mice that had absolutely none is really fantastic.
Thank you, Kat. Now, also this week, scientists in Scotland have discovered that humans and probably many other animals make their own anti-inflammatory chemicals. And the person who's made that discovery is Dr. Gwen Baxter, and she's from Dumfries and Galloway Royal Infirmary, and she's here to tell us a bit about her discovery. Hello, Gwen.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us on The Naked Scientist. So what are the chemicals that you've discovered that humans make that are their own aspirin-like agents?
Well, it's the finding that salicylic acid can be produced from benzoic acid, which hasn't been reported in humans before.
Tell us a little bit about salicylic acid. What is it?
Okay, salicylic acid is a very simple compound. It's been around, very simple molecule. It's been around for a long time. It's recorded as being used as a therapeutic agent from about 3000 BC, when it was used to relieve pain, act as an anti-inflammatory agent, if you like, and to help reduce temperature, as in fever.
So if we have it in our body already, why do we need to take more of it?
Well, what we've discovered is that we seem to be able to produce it ourselves, and that's the novel thing that we're reporting, that previously we had assumed it was something that people took in perhaps diet. Now we've found that it persists in people.
What do you think it's actually doing in the people, though?
We're thinking it's a bit like considering your endorphins. I think people are familiar with that they can be upregulated. You can increase the amount circulating should you require to do so in times of stress. And it's a very close sort of thinking to what happens with salicylic acid in plants, because in plants it does act as a responder, if you like, to stress, such as attack by a pathogen. So we're saying that humans are possibly in a position to do the same thing because we've shown that we can produce it.
Now, you can make the same stuff from aspirin. In fact, when you put aspirin into the body, it eventually turns into salicylic acid, doesn't it? So do you think that what you've discovered is basically the way in which aspirin, or part of the way in which aspirin works, is achieved?
Well, I think you've got to go back a wee bit. That salicylic acid was used for the things that aspirin's used for, except for the effect that aspirin has on platelets and stops them sticking together, which is a therapeutic use of aspirin that salicylic acid doesn't have in the same way, although it does act as an anti-inflammatory.
How do you actually get the salicylic made in the body, and does everyone make it, and do some people have more than others?
Well, that's another interesting thing. We've done lots of work over the years. We've looked at people who obviously would have more salicylic acid in their body because they perhaps eat it, so obviously vegetarians, and they do have higher levels. No surprises there. But we've also looked at people who have been fasting and they still maintain it. So obviously it's not coming from diet, which was sort of the starting point of where is it coming from and can we find it. We're thinking that if we can find the store for it, it must be somewhere in the body or some precursor such as benzoic acid, which is a product of lots of other metabolic pathways that we have already recorded in our body, that it can be used as a bioregulator and help perhaps with some chemoprotection. As for does everybody make it, well, we have to find that out. And certainly in our work we've discovered that not everyone can metabolize the salicylic acid. So perhaps there is a relationship there to maybe gene expression again. And I think the bottom line on that would be that it regulates biological systems, and a lot of people are working currently on how very small amounts of this salicylic acid can actually modulate gene expression. So it may be that if you're good at making it, you're protected better than people who can't.
And maybe you have a lower risk of cancer. Gwen, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much. That was Dr. Gwen Baxter from Dumfries and Galloway Royal Infirmary.
Keeping you abreast of the world's best science. The Naked Scientists.
This is The Naked Scientists with Dr. Chris, Dr. Kat and Dr. Dave. It's our science phone-in extravaganza. So if you have a science question for us, the email address for the programme is chris@thenakedscientist.com. We're, of course, live also in Second Life, where when we were talking about mosquitoes, Troy McLuhan said, it hurts, ba-boom. And Pookie Amsterdam says, do we send out frequencies like this to make people get attracted to us? And the answer is yes, we do, because we speak to them. And scientists have shown that men who have deep voices tend to be more attractive to women who fancy men, obviously, and so voice is down to level of testosterone. The more testosterone you have, the lower your voice, and so it can be a sign of a well-testosteronized man. And also there was a study recently where they showed that women who are at their peak fertility tend to use higher tones in their voice than at other times of the month. And so women speak with a higher pitch when they're more fertile. So this is maybe another subtle clue that women are giving away their fertility, using to give away their fertility to men. So if you've got a question for us, do send them in. Kat?
Well, it's now time for our kitchen science, and we have an experiment here that is apparently hundreds of years old, but it explains something that every time we see in modern day, when we polish a TV set, when we use a mobile phone in the rain, or that old chestnut sneezing on your computer monitor. So, Dave, what is this all about, and what do we need to do?
Okay, this is a really, really simple kitchen science. All you need is a little bit of water, a bit of plastic, the kind of clear plastic which you sometimes get in packaging or inside of a lemonade bottle, that sort of stuff.
That looks like the tray from some pork pies or something.
Yeah,
you've got there.
I think it's actually a tray from some posh, rather nice biscuits I got over Christmas.
Not pork pies.
Not pork pies.
OK, what do we do with our pork pie tray?
OK, so basically you want to cut a piece out of this pork pie tray, sort of maybe a couple of centimetres wide and 4 or 5 long.
OK.
So I'll just do that quickly.
Again, all Blue Peter, yeah.
I haven't got one I made earlier, I'm afraid. OK, so we've got this bit of plastic.
Yep.
And then all you need to do is get a little bit of water on the end of your finger. Or
it has to be clear plastic.
Clear
you can
plastic,
see through it.
yeah, see-through plastic. Put a sort of blob of water on the end. If it isn't very round, like the one I just did, keep trying until you get a nice circular blob of water. That one's not too bad.
OK, so a nice little round, that's about half a centimetre in diameter?
Yeah, so 5 or 6 millimetres is a good one to start with. Then look at things through it, basically. You might have to get your eyes very close to it. Try getting your eyes very close to it and very close to an object, put it quite close to an object and have a look through it. And if anything interesting happens, give us a ring.
Right, well, let's see what you can see through your bit of pork pie tray and water. And we'll get Dave to explain later what's going on and what this has to do with sneezing on your monitor later on the show.
Thank you, Kat. And don't forget that on our website we put down all the references and the full transcript of this programme every single week, nakedscientist.com. So if there's anything you want to check out or any of the research you've been hearing about so far in the programme, you can find it there. Coming up, we'll be visiting the Milton Keynes snow zone where Mira went to get totally frozen to find out how they actually make the snow so she could go for a bit of skiing. But we are, of course, answering your questions too. And Kat got this one here from Brian, who says, "Yo, Naked Scientists, I was cleaning the roof of my garage, sweeping fallen leaves and branches away, and there was all this decomposing matter there that had reached critical mass, which was making some soil on the roof, and as I cleaned it off, I was surprised to find healthy earthworms in the soil. How did they make it up there?"
Well, this is an interesting one, but my prime suspect in this case would be birds. There is some evidence that worms can crawl, but I doubt that big earthworms can crawl that far. I reckon that something like a bird has got mud on its beak or is maybe carrying another earthworm or something like that that's got mud on it, that's got tiny earthworm eggs, and they've got deposited up there. And because, it's a nice environment, if it's nice and damp, you got soil, organic matter up there, then those dropped worm cocoons, the eggs in a little kind of bundle, have just started to grow. So I reckon they've been dropped up there by birds.
I agree, because when I was little, I got into trouble with my parents for putting a worm in my brother's hair, which I absolutely did not do, and because he reached into his hair and there was this worm in there, and I got told off for it, but actually a bird had just gone over, and I think the bird dropped the worm on my brother's head. I didn't do it, honestly, I did not do it, so I think I thoroughly agree with you. Dave, got a question here from Jim, who says, why does a bike stay up so much more easily when it's moving? It's very hard to balance when the bike isn't actually moving.
It is very hard to balance when a bike's stationary. There's two effects. One of them is that basically, if you tip if the bike tips over to the left, you'll see that the front wheel tends to turn into the left as well, basically just because the front forks are leaning forwards, so it's more stable if the handlebars tip to the left. So when the handlebars tip to the left, then you tend to steer into the corner, and then the wheel kind of works its way back underneath you. So if you start to fall off the bike, then the bike comes underneath you.
So it's like if I give you the old trick of a broom handle, and you can balance a broom handle in the palm of your hand, but just by moving your hand around, you can hold the broom handle vertically. It's because whenever the broom starts to fall in one direction, you move your hand to go effectively into the direction of fall, and that's what keeps it stable, and the bike's doing the same thing.
The bike's doing the same thing automatically. There is also a gyroscopic effect, which can help, but you don't need a gyroscopic effect, but it does help.
Yes, because the wheels are spinning, and so because the wheels are themselves turning, they have a gyroscopic moment. So it's obviously difficult to make it deviate, but then given that it's most unstable when it's moving slower, probably, and yet you can still balance.
Yeah,
that's probably more minimum, isn't it? You'd probably get more stable as you speed up, wouldn't you?
You do, and it is a lot easier to ride when you're going faster. Basically what's happening is, if you imagine a spinning top, when it starts to fall over, it sort of starts to rotate round and round in circles. The same thing happens to your bike wheel. As it starts to turn over, it starts to rotate, and it turns into the corner as well.
Thank you, Dave.
I am legendarily famous for falling off stationary bicycles.
Why don't you try riding them along then?
Well, it's usually under the influence of ethanol. Anyway, we've got a question for you, Chris, from John in Orange County, who wants to know, how do clouds form electricity for lightning? How is the energy stored, or is it dynamically generated?
Well, actually, the answer is we don't 100% know. But clouds are made of billions and billions of tiny particles, ice crystals. They're called hydrometeors. And these particles rub against each other in the cloud because the clouds are full of currents of air. And there are big ones and small ones. And in exactly the same way as if you take a balloon or a comb and run it through your hair, you will transfer charge from one thing, your hair, to the balloon or the comb. And this enables you to have static electricity. The same thing happens with these particles in the cloud. And by a mechanism that no one understands that well, for some reason the small ones get a negative charge. Sorry, the big ones get a negative charge and the small ones get a positive charge. And the small ones get pushed to the top of the cloud under up currents more than the bigger ones. So that's why you get this charge distribution within the cloud. Some people speculate it might be something to do with the solar wind, which is this charged stream of particles coming from the sun past the Earth's magnetosphere. But that aside, what you end up with is a big aggregation of static energy within the cloud, which is separated according to its charge. The bottom of the cloud is very, very negative. The Earth, therefore, feels an electric field pushing effectively towards it, and this repels any negative charge in the surface of the Earth because the negatives can move away, leaving the surface of the Earth net positive. This obviously intensifies the electric field, and the result is that eventually the potential difference that builds up overcomes the natural insulation or the inherent resistance of the air, and it begins to ionize. This is where you strip electrons away from gas molecules in the atmosphere, and because electrons can move, they can conduct, you begin to carry a current, so you'll get a few feelers come down, and then when you've got a sufficient and contiguous connection between cloud and ground, you'll get the full-on strike. And it comes zipping down. The actual discharge is only about the size of a 5p piece, and it lasts for billionths of a second, microseconds if at best, I think. And the actual current that flows down it is something like 20,000 amps. And it's discharging between 1 and 10 billion joules of energy, which is in fact enough to light a 100-watt light bulb for about 100 days. So it's not a huge amount. But it's enough to make a big bang, obviously. And the reason that the lightning's nice and bright is because as that electricity goes smashing through the air, it causes the electrons to get in the atoms to get very excited. They then fall back to their original energy positions, giving out some light in the process, but they also get very, very hot. And because of the thermal expansion, you get a shockwave. It's like a gun going off, and that's the thunder that you hear later. So that's a sort of snapshot of how lightning forms, and it's all down to these particles in clouds. Dave? Well, I thought you were going to say something. Sorry, I thought you were going to add something. I've got a question for Kat otherwise.
Oh, yeah.
This is from William Isdale, who says, why do you get white blooms on refrigerated chocolate? I was recently given a block of chocolate for Christmas from a friend, and to avoid it melting, as it's currently summer here in Australia, where he is, I put it in the fridge. I finally got around to eating it today. When I unwrapped it, I noticed there were white spots all over the place.
Now, I've been doing a lifetime of research into chocolate.
Most of it practical.
Yes, exactly. Practical science into chocolate. And yes, you're right. Bloom on chocolate, this kind of white stuff you see on it, is not harmful. You get two types of bloom on chocolate. You get cocoa butter bloom, which is when the cocoa butter comes to the surface of the chocolate. And you can tell if you've got cocoa butter bloom because it kind of feels a bit oily and greasy. Or you can get sugar bloom, and that's when sugar crystals come out of your chocolate, and that feels kind of granular. But what's causing it? Well, chocolatiers think that what causes bloom is when you get temperature changes, big changes in temperature to chocolate. So, for example, as it's been hot in Australia, and now you've put your chocolate that's been in a hot place into the fridge to keep it cold, you've put it through quite a big temperature differential and then got it back out of the fridge again. So that's caused the bloom. And it's probably best just to try and keep your chocolate at a cool, stable temperature, not necessarily in the fridge, and that'll keep it nice and hopefully non-bloomy.
Thank you, Kat. This is The Naked Scientists, and if you'd like to do some practical chocolate eating, then we'd love to hear your experiences, but we'd also love your science questions. If you've got anything you'd like us to solve for you, the email address for The Naked Scientists is chris@thenakedscientist.com. We'll be hearing from Jack in Corby very shortly, who wants to know why rockets don't burn up on their way up. Maybe you can help us. Tell us what you think. And also, Les in Bury St Edmunds says, I've always understood that by wearing a hat you keep heat in, but I read an article in the paper yesterday saying it's a myth. What do you think?
Laying the facts bare. I say. The Naked Scientists.
This is The Naked Scientists with Chris Smith, Kat Arney and Dave Ansell. And it's been snowing here in the UK a little bit. Well, a little bit where I am. And that's not something that happens very often. And most of us imagine snow, think of bright white mountains, the Alps, the Rockies, swishing down and going and having the après ski afterwards. But we don't have that kind of money here on The Naked Scientists to go en piste. And in fact, we've sent Mira Synthillingham to go and find out in Milton Keynes how you make snow in the UK.
Yes, it is the season that many of us decide to go skiing to various resorts around the world. But this week, I'm at a place that you can ski that's in the UK and also inside. I'm at the Milton Keynes Snow Zone, part of the Escape Adventure Complex in Buckinghamshire. Now, in front of me, there are 3 snow slopes, 2 of which are up to 173 metres long and 20 metres wide. The best bit is that all of these slopes are actually made of real snow. But what does it actually take to create the snow that's in here and fill basically a big dome like this with tons and tons of snow? Well, here to tell me all about it is Richard Shears, who's the facilities manager here at Snow Zone.
The temperature at the moment, Mira, is -2, -3 degrees. Up above us are some large radiators. Within the radiators there are 6 large fans. These fans blow air across the radiator, and the radiator is cooled down to -16 degrees with an antifreeze mixture inside there. When we're running at full capacity at 100% fans, it will chill the air down to probably -6 degrees, and that's the temperature that we make the snow at.
Can you just describe the actual structure here of the slope?
Yeah, underneath the snow is a large concrete slab stretching from the base of the slope right up to the top of the slope. The concrete slab is covered with an insulating material, and on top of the insulating material is lines and lines of 20mm pipes, and these 20mm pipes contain the antifreeze mixture, which is cooled down to -16 degrees, which when we run water over the pipes, it freezes and gives us a depth of ice down to probably 30 to 40mm thick of ice layer underneath the snow.
OK, so now to find out how the snow's actually made, we're going to head up to the snow bar, which is on the second floor and looks out over the snow slope, so we can actually see the sprayers that the snow is created from. So let's head up there now, because I actually can't feel my fingers at the moment. Now, Richard, you create up to 1,500 tonnes of snow here, all with these sprayers that seem to be located at different positions around the room. How do these actually go about creating the snow?
The snow is created by using high-pressure water and air, which runs through what we call a snow gun. The water and the air are broken up into fine particles, then blown out at high pressure into the atmosphere of the ski box. When the mixture hits the atmosphere, it freezes into a fine snowy mist, which lands onto the ground, which forms real snow.
What other conditions need to be maintained to just get the maximum snow created here?
During the night, we can drop the temperature of the ski box down to minus 6-7 degrees, providing the humidity is right in the box. We can make the snow at that temperature. Obviously, the higher that you can drop the snow from the snow guns, the longer it has to form, the better the snow can be made.
But how does this actually compare to the snow we get outside? Is it the same?
The structure of the snow is a little bit different, where you have nice snowflakes outside and they're allowed to form. Can probably fall from 30,000 feet, and we're falling from 40 to 50 feet. The ice crystal doesn't have that time to actually form and grow. Outside, every snowflake that you get is different. If you put them under a microscope, you see the shapes all different. In the snow we get here, because it's a controlled environment, it's an ice crystal that comes out, but they're all formed in the same structure.
And what do the actual crystals look like? Are they quite spherical then?
Yeah, they're round. If you put them under a microscope, they're all uniform. They're all round. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you, Mira.
We've been talking about this snow so much now, and I can just see all these skiers out in front of me that I really need to go and try it out for myself.
So it's possible to practice your skiing without paying hundreds to go abroad, and thanks to really cold buildings and really high-pressure water vapour. And there's going to be a few more real snow slopes like this all over the country, and that was Mira Senthilingam talking to Richard Shears from the Snow Zone in Milton Keynes. Now, Dave, remind us about this kitchen science.
It's really simple. All you need to do is get a piece of transparent plastic, one of the ones which is kind of stiff but still flexible, kind of thin stuff you get in packaging quite often. Get a little blob of water, maybe 5 or 6 millimetres across, put it on the end of the plastic, hold it, and then have a look at something with it. Basically, try getting it really close, a bit further away, change the distances and see what you can see.
So there you go. That's Dave's Kitchen Science Challenge for this week. What do you see? Tell us. Our email address is chris@thenakedscientist.com. Ian's in Essex. Hello, Ian.
Hello there, Chris.
What can we do for you?
Chris, why does one get cramp?
Well, cramp is a muscle spasm, Ian, and we don't actually know what cramp is. We just know that if people have regular cramps, and it tends to happen quite often at night, and it tends to happen in older people more than younger people, and it tends to be relieved with quinine, the same stuff that makes tonic water taste very nice. So a muscle spasm is when some of the muscle fibres, because a muscle isn't just one homogeneous giant thing, it's actually made up of lots of individual little muscle fibres. Some of those muscle fibres go into a spasm. In other words, they contract more than they should, and they lock in a contracted state. Now, surprisingly, muscle actually takes energy to relax, not to contract. And when a person dies, they go into rigor mortis because the cells in their muscles run out of energy and the muscles can't relax, and therefore they stay rigid. And that's why a person gets rigor mortis. But if you leave them a bit longer, then the rigor mortis goes away again when the muscle breaks down and starts to relax. So what cramp could be is, for some reason, that clutch of muscle fibres don't have enough energy in them, perhaps because there's been a reduction in blood flow that's insufficient for the muscle's needs, and therefore the muscle runs a little bit short of energy, and this causes it or trips it into this inability to relax properly, and you get a cramp. And rubbing a muscle and massaging it to get the blood flowing back through it and get rid of waste products can make that better. So great question, and thanks for calling us. Now, also on the line, we've got Jack is in Corby. We're coming to him very shortly, but before then, Simon sent us a text message, probably one for you, Dave. He says, "Good evening. Why does my car windscreen mist up only when it rains, and is there any way of stopping that from happening?"
Okay, what's happening when your car windscreen mists up is basically you've got lots of moisture in the air inside your car, and then if the car windscreen is cold enough, then it'll be below the dew point, so below the temperature at which that moisture can condense on it, and so you get water condensing on the windscreen until eventually you get little droplets, and they make it very hard to see through. Now, there's various things which could affect this. One of them is the amount of moisture in the air. So if if it's raining, it's probably very humid, and also you're probably wet, so you're probably heating up and evaporating water off you, so it makes the air very, very moist. And the other big one is how cold the glass is, and if it's raining, then the rain's probably hitting the glass and taking a lot of energy out of it and cooling it down. So probably two reasons. One is that there's more moisture in the air, and the other one is that the glass is cooled down.
Thank you, Dave. Just responding to the cramp question, Zanzibar Rothschild says, bananas are good for muscle cramps. Could it be down to potassium? Could be, but I don't know for sure. I know that if you don't have enough potassium, then you can end up with excitable cells in that way, and this can lead to muscle spasms, so that's a possibility. Also, Vangar Ponchartrain, if I hope I said that right, says, what about spasms that occur all over the body when some people fall asleep? Well, I think you're thinking of what's called a hypnic jerk. When people fall asleep, and you can notice this yourself, just as you're nodding off, you suddenly jerk violently, and often enough to wake you up again, and certainly wake up anybody who's sleeping next to you. And if you're on a bus with somebody you don't know, then it scares the hell out of them, because I've done that to people. And this is a hypnic jerk, and it's to do with the part of the nervous system that paralyses you when you go to sleep, because when we go to sleep and we dream, you don't want to be acting out your dreams, because that could have unfortunate consequences. So there's a region of the nervous system, it's called the subcerulear region in your brainstem, which receives information about when you're going to dream, and it also has the ability to switch off the flow of motor systems going down to your spinal cord, so it can paralyse your body when you go to sleep. So when you're going to sleep and you're switching in this system, sometimes it gets a bit carried away and you get these jerks as the system is turning on, and those are hypnic jerks, and that's why that happens. Now, Dave, quick question from Jack in Corby. I think this is definitely one for you. Jack, hello.
Hello.
What would you like to ask Dave?
Just to finish off what I heard earlier about the cramps, actually, I've always found the best remedy is to put your hands below your body, whatever situation you're in. You know what I mean, sitting down or whatever, put your hands below your body or run them under hot water. And I think that gets the circulation going.
But what about if your cramp is in your ankle?
That's a very good point. I have no idea about that.
Now tell us about this space rocket question, though, Jack.
Yes, what goes up must come down, as they say. Why do space shuttles and the like, rockets and whatnot, go up without resistance into the upper stratosphere, and yet come back, with resistance and, have heat shields and stuff like that? Okay, meteors, experience the same thing and stuff like that, but why does that happen?
So basically, why does a space rocket burn up? It seems to be trying to overheat and burn up on the way down, but not the way up. Well, basically, on the way out, it's all to do, the amount of heat you're generating is going to be to do with how fast you're going and how thick the atmosphere is. So the thicker the atmosphere and the faster you're going, the more heat you generate. On the way up, although space rockets will go several times the speed of sound, and they do get some heating on the way up, it's not that much because they're going fairly slowly while they're near the ground where the air's really thick, and by the time they get going very fast, they're up into much thinner air, so there's much less heating. On the way down, they're going really fast, and they're still going very fast, but they're going really fast through the thin air, and as the air gets thicker and thicker and thicker, they've still got lots of energy.
So the problem is reversed, basically.
Well, it's not quite reversed, but they're still going faster high up and down, but they're still going very fast when they're fairly low down. There's a lot more heating, so they get very, very hot.
Yeah, because the escape velocity is 14,000 miles an hour or something ridiculous, isn't it?
Very, very fast.
And so they have to have a way of dissipating that heat.
And they can't dissipate all that energy in the upper atmosphere, so they've got to dissipate it lower down. There's more air there, so you're going to get more friction.
We've had a quick text in here from Mark in Bletchley, which I'm assuming is about the mosquito buzzing story that we had earlier. And he said, my ex-missus definitely hit the high notes normally when she was telling me off. Thanks very much for that, Mark. We've got a question here from Israel in the USA. He wants to know, why is urine usually yellow? Is it usually yellow in most species, just mammals? It's mostly water, so why is it yellow?
The yellow colour is because of the stuff that makes your blood red. When we break down dead red blood cells, which last about 120 days, the haemoglobin, this is a protein which has got an iron atom at the centre, that protein gets broken down into something called bilirubin. And bilirubin is dumped out of the body by the liver. The liver metabolises the bilirubin a bit by adding some sugar to make it dissolve in water, puts it into bile, and your bile then gets squirted into your small intestine to help you to reabsorb fats. But the bilirubin, because it has some sugars stuck on it, becomes broken down by bacteria. And the bacteria metabolize the molecule and they turn it into something which is called urobilinogen. And urobilinogen gets reabsorbed further down the small intestine. And unlike bilirubin, which is not very soluble in water, urobilinogen is very soluble in water, but they're both a brown colour. So the urobilinogen goes round in your bloodstream again, but when it goes through your kidney, because it's soluble in water, it moves out through the kidney in the same way as the other things that go into urine do. And it therefore goes into your urine, and because your urine is a concentrate of plasma, you would take water back but leave the products that have got filtered behind, then it builds up in the urine and adds this brown colour, and so urine goes darker and darker and darker. And the more dehydrated you are, the less you've had to drink, the darker it is because the concentration of that's higher.
I think also there may be a bit of it that's riboflavin as well, because if you take lots of B vitamins like Berocca and things like that, because they're water soluble, if you have too many, you just wee them out. And I think riboflavin, when it's dissolved in water, is very yellow as well, so that may be part of it too.
The majority is urobilinogen. I can absolutely swear by that one. I can swear by that one. It is The Naked Scientist, Dr. Chris, Dr. Dave and Dr. Kat. We're taking all your science questions for you, and if you'd like to ask us anything, you can email the programme by emailing chris@thenakedscientist.com. Coming up, we'll be looking at this week's question of the week to find out whether life ever arrived on Earth from outer space.
Lifting the lab coat on the world's best science. The Naked Scientists.
This is The Naked Scientists with Chris Smith, Dave Ansell and Kat Arney.
And now it's time to welcome Diana O'Carroll to the studio. She certainly doesn't look like an alien today. What have you got for us with our question of the week?
I've put my antennae away. Well, this week, is there life on Mars?
Hello, my name is John Wilson. I live in Zeist in the Netherlands, near Utrecht. And my question this week is related to something that I heard previously on The Naked Scientists, and was to do with lots of rubbish falling to Earth from outer space. And I wondered whether they'd found any life in the rubbish that falls to Earth.
So, can we expect a tentacled fossil from outer space anytime soon?
I'm Dr. Vic Pearson from the Open University. The likelihood of finding life in meteorites is probably pretty slim. There was, in the 1990s, a big debate on whether or not NASA scientists had identified nanobacteria, so very, very small bacteria, only identifiable using very powerful microscopes, in meteorites that had actually come from the surface of Mars. But this has pretty much been debunked now. However, that's not to say that the building blocks of life may not have been brought to Earth from meteorites, because meteorites themselves contain biogenic elements such as sulfur, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, but also carbon-based molecules or organic molecules which are required for life on Earth and elsewhere in the solar system. These are things such as amino acids, carboxylic acid, sugars, hydrocarbons, all of which make up living systems on the Earth, and all of which are the backbone of the organic molecules that make up our own DNA. So the chances of being able to find life elsewhere in the solar system is also a lot stronger by the fact that you can find these organic molecules there. But whether or not you can actually get life itself from meteorites is probably very unlikely.
So, as yet, there's no sign of life in our meteorite collection, but we'll just have to watch this space for more evidence to land in our back gardens. On our forum, your_on also said that some of the building blocks, for life at least, had been found in meteorites. Carsten speculated that perhaps any life forms had, on impact, jumped off the rocks and run away.
I've been out with a few of them.
Bad club lighting. Anyway, next week I'll be tackling another mystery set in stone.
Hi, this is Erin in Austin, Texas, and my question concerns petrified wood. I've heard stories of wooden fence posts becoming petrified over time, but I'm not sure that this is scientifically possible. So can you please tell me, how is petrified wood formed, and what exactly does it consist of?
And you can put the answers on our forum, that's where there's lots of discussion, answers and questions, at thenakedscientist.com/forum, or send them to chris@thenakedscientist.com and tell us what this scared form of timber is all about.
Thank you very much to Diana O'Carroll for this week's Question of the Week. And you can also get Question of the Week as its own podcast if you happen to love Question of the Week that much. There's about 50 of them on iTunes and also from our website now. You just search for Question of the Week. This is The Naked Scientist with Dr. Chris, Dr. Dave and Dr. Kat. Dr. Dave's kitchen science experiment is coming up very shortly, where he asked you to put a blob of water on a piece of Perspex and then look through it at a surface. What do you see? Also, if you've got any science questions for us, the email address is chris@thenakedscientist.com.
Bringing the facts to bear. The Naked Scientists.
It's The Naked Scientists with Dr. Chris, Dr. Dave and Dr. Kat. Got a question here for you, Dave. Richard Poulton says, does my iPod get heavier when I add more music to it? I suppose presumably it would if you added heavy metal, wouldn't it?
I'm not sure how much it depends on the type of music. Okay, there's the only way that actually adding music to your iPod could increase its mass could be if you were somehow increasing the energy of it. Now, the way especially modern iPods tend to store music is in what's called flash memory, and this has lots of little tiny cells inside it, and you tend to trap a few electrons, maybe a few hundred electrons, in a little gap in a little space, and then that affects how current will flow through a wire, and so you can read it again. Now, this is going to store some energy, but a minuscule amount, and probably like a thousandth of a joule, the most, inside the whole of your iPod, if you even filled it completely with music. And that's only for the ones, so the zeros wouldn't be storing any of that, so only half of that amount. And that extra energy equals mc squared will increase the mass ever so slightly, but that's a tiny amount, and that's far less than the increase in mass of the when you charge up the battery, which is also far less than the amount of mass you'd get from putting a greasy fingerprint on the top of it.
So the answer is yes. If you do actually put some energy into the iPod, if whatever you do to it means it gains some energy, because Einstein says E equals mc squared, it has to gain some mass, but whatever happens, the amount is going to be absolutely tiny.
Yep.
Thank you, Dave. Cat, question here from Brenda Herbert, who says, is it true that adult cancers, when they present, are all late stage? In other words, by the time you've detected a cancer, has it been growing in you for more than 10 years and probably already spread somewhere else?
Absolutely not at all, because then screening wouldn't work. Things like the breast screening and the bowel screening that we have now. Some cancers, yes, often when they're found, they are advanced, and that's why the government's trying to do a lot through an initiative called the National Early Detection and Awareness Initiative to try and catch cancers earlier. But in many cases, for example, bowel cancers, you can spot them when they're just a little polyp. You can take it away, and that cancer will not have grown anywhere. In the case of breast cancers, breast screening picks up very small tumours that really haven't spread far. So it's not necessarily true for all types of cancers that, they will have spread around the place. Certainly not.
Can I just ask you, though, which might be what Brenda was getting at, which is, could it be that she means cancer being a multi-stage process where you slowly build up and acquire changes to your DNA which eventually mean you get cancer, and you could have spent a lifetime building up those changes, inevitably you have, and so therefore you're on your way to cancer all the way through your life, but it's only latterly that you finally can call it cancer?
Well, that's kind of true, because we do pick up all sorts of damage to our DNA just in the hurly-burly of life within our cells. And cancer is a disease that usually takes a very long time to happen. There is also an idea that we do just, everyone has tiny, tiny little cancers all over us, but it's our immune system that's constantly patrolling our bodies and keeping these under control. And what happens when cancer really starts to grow is that it's started to somehow evade this immune suppression and really start going for it. And there's a lot we don't really understand about how cancer really gets going, how it interacts with the immune system.
Got a quick question for you here, Chris, from Brianna, which is, why do we get goosebumps and chills and things when we're scared, especially if someone starts talking about ghosts?
OK, well, goosebumps or goose pimples are the bulges caused by your piloerector muscles. These are the muscles that make your hairs stand on end. Now, in other animals like mice, cats, dogs, making your hair stand on end is a good thing, because if you're cold, you trap more air next to your body and this thermally insulates you. If you're scared, it makes you look much bigger. And if you look much bigger, then you're scarier to other animals and they're less likely to attack you. Now, we're obviously derived and related to all these other mammals that do this. We just have less hair, so it doesn't serve a very useful purpose in us. It's just a sort of evolutionary vestige, really. I would say that's probably the most sensible way to say.
Now, let's find out what we're doing in this kitchen science. So we had a piece of transparent pork pie tray, put a tiny round drop of water on it, and we're looking closely through it at something. So, Dave, what should we be seeing?
So have a look at this. This is our script here.
Okay, so I've got my script. I've got the piece of plastic. I'm holding it right up my eye, right up to the blob, and right on there. Oh, my goodness. So, like, the letters, I can see through the drop of water, the letters are really, really big. Like it's magnified them.
Yeah, basically we've built a magnifying glass.
Out of just water and some pork pie tray?
Just out of water and a pork pie tray, that's right, Kat.
How does that work then?
OK, basically light goes a little bit slower in water than it does in air. And if you imagine a car will go slower over sand than the road. So if you're driving on a road and your left-hand wheel goes into the sand, it'll slow down and turn in towards the sand, turn you around a corner. So basically when the light hits the water, it's going to turn around a corner as it enters it, and when it leaves, it'll speed up again and then turn back again. And because it's curved, that means the light ends up bent. And it just so happens with a smooth curve with a droplet of water like that, it bends the light in such a way as it makes it look like there's a bigger object there than there actually is.
So it's acting like a lens, really, like a tiny little lens.
It is a tiny little lens. In In fact, these were the first really good quality microscopes which were built by a guy called Anthony van Leeuwenhoek. We had a little brass plate and had a little tiny, almost spherical glass lens, very likely a droplet of water in the middle of it. And by looking, it's quite difficult to use to get really high magnifications, but he managed to get a magnification about 200 times, get very, very close up to things, and he actually was the first person to see bacteria. First person to see microbes. In about 1683, he was looking very closely at some of the plaque from one of his mate's teeth. And he saw little creatures like swimming around in it. Unfortunately, he didn't associate it with disease, and it took another couple of hundred years until Louis Pasteur in the 19th century worked this out. So there was about 200 years, and no one really believed him that he'd seen these things because it was very difficult to use this microscope.
Now, earlier we were talking about when I sneezed on the monitor, and it kind of looks funny. If you sneeze on a computer monitor, you get little droplets of water. Is that the same thing that's going on here?
I'll blob some water on. Don't tell the BBC.
Yeah, you can see it kind of looks weird under where the droplets are.
You can see almost little rainbows under the droplets. What's going on here is that you're basically magnifying the screen quite large, maybe factor of 10 or 20, especially you get very small droplets. And what you've on a screen, there's 3 different colours. There's red, green and blue, and there's different amounts of those colours add up to give all the colours in the rainbow. And so basically you're magnifying little blobs of red, green and blue, and you can actually see the separate ones.
Yeah, you can see them, can't you? I've got little stripes in there.
That's why everything goes rainbowy when you sneeze on your monitor.
Who'd have thought that? Fascinating. So if you found that at home, or if you found unusual magnifying glasses anywhere else, do write in and let us know. It's chris@thenakedscientist.com.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I wonder if you actually would do a modern-day equivalent of that and see bacteria in the snot that you sneeze out, and MRSA and God knows what. I'm afraid to report, guys, we've run out of time. So thank you very much to everyone who has contributed to this week's Naked Scientists Science Phone-In. Next week, we are turning to the problem of the post-Christmas bulge. We're looking at obesity, but we're looking specifically at the genes that can make you become obese, and also looking at the question of how what you eat can affect the baby that grows inside a pregnant woman, because there's a phenomenon called epigenetics where you can change the expression of genes based on the health of a mother, and we'll be finding out how what you eat can have impacts on your baby. Join us next week if you can.
The Naked Scientist podcast comes to you from Cambridge University and is supported by the Wellcome Trust, the EPSRC and UK Fast. For more information, look us up online at nakedscientist.com.